If everyone can take their seats, please, we need to move on. I think we just about have everyone back in the room. I usually thins out a bit after lunch, but the numbers are looking pretty solid to me. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. If I could have your attention, please. This is how we do it. We go shh. And everyone is quiet. Thank you very much. Welcome back to our session, which will be a straight run through and get you safely on the road at 3:30. Our first speaker is Sarah Barrett, the lead consultant in sustainability strategy at Pinion Advisory, and until recently the chair of Landcare South Australia, to discuss the work she is leading in carbon accounting in agriculture. Thank you very much. Please welcome Sarah.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks very much to the RDA Regions for having me. Also just wanted to acknowledge the Bungala and the Nukunu people for acknowledging them as our first land carers with my land care hat. I like to say that, but also our traditional custodians of our country. I work in a national role with Pinion. Pinion is an agricultural consultancy company, although we also do a lot of work in water and the environment as well. And I feel like my role in sustainability strategy is a little bit like OH&S used to be, where companies put on an OH&S officer and then just expected that to all happen. But somewhere along the line, we all started to be involved in this. And the sustainability strategy space is a little bit like that too. This is a little bit of a picture of where I'm from. I'm from the Barossa Valley, and I live in an area with these beautiful, the gum-studded country with these beautiful river red gums. So that's me there. So I just wanted to firstly start off by setting the scene a little bit in agriculture. And it has been mentioned already, but I also wanted to just set the scene in terms of where we are today and some of the challenges that we have. We have a pretty challenging season that's going to build some more character. And, that frost event that we've had has been quite significant in this state, and just want to recognise that at this moment. But more broadly, just a few little things to touch on in terms of where we are in agriculture in 2024. I've got quite a few grey hairs on my head, and I've been around for a while now, and I've seen some significant change in agriculture over the years. And some of that absolutely is for good, and I feel like it's much easier now to do my role and to do my work in sustainability in agriculture now than it has been in the past, and that's a really exciting space for me to be in now. But ag tech really is driving a lot of transition in our space, and there's been some real trends and change in agriculture, those mega trends. We have these labour pinch points that's driven a lot of that change into ag tech and the necessity for that, and COVID showed us a lot of that. And we have less farmers doing more, so we have this pinch point happening there. There's also a lot of change happening in data management, and this space really speaks to that. Does anybody own a fax machine? My mother does. My parents, fortunately, in some ways, are transitioning out of agriculture at the moment. Probably the only other person in the country who has a fax machine is my parents' accountant, because my mother faxes the handwritten monthly reconciliation to the accountant. But yeah, look, there's some big changes happening and needed to be. Like this is, we're dealing with agriculture in a very highly organised fashion, and we need some data management around that. There's also climate and change. So we have variability in our climate. in our systems, and we need some certainty. We need to be able to manage risk in this space to make good decisions. We also have these pledges and targets being made by industry and within our top tiers of supply chains that are influencing agriculture and what we do on farm. We'll get to that in a minute. And then I've also just expressed this greater connection. So we have a customer base, a supply chain that really wants to know where our food is coming from and how we're producing it. They want to see, nobody's mentioned ESG today, but environmental social governance evidence, this evidence that we need to provide to show that. So that they're not just satisfied with us saying that we're doing these things, that we're good, we're looking after our land, we're looking after our biodiversity, we're looking after our natural resources, we're looking after our communities, but we really need to be starting to produce evidence around that. In our state at the moment, if you sell export canola or barley, you may be asked to sign up to the International Standard International Sustainability for Carbon Certification, which is a certification that's come through the EU market. So we have farmers at the moment that are signing up to these certification systems, and some of them don't have any other choice. They may not have anywhere else to send their product not to do that. So that's just part of the market space at the moment. That's starting to come in. And really that's around trying to understand those environmental credentials of the product that we're supplying into that EU market. There's been a few of these graphs today. I've got one too. They're kind of popular. And I think Rachel summed it up really well this morning. But we know that we're at this junction point where we really need to start making some significant inroads into reducing the emissions and contributing to that target of trying to keep our emissions under that 1.5, and I'll say 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius, because as we've talked about this morning, we're already overshooting that. As some guidance in that space, we do have some international drivers and some international standards, like the Science Based Target Initiative, which is really around a voluntary mechanism for organisations, companies to sign up to make some targets and pledges that have some scientific rigour around them. And also our international standards, so we have the International Sustainability Standards Boards and how that's all flowing through in terms of what's happened now with the climate-related financial disclosures and the changes in our Corporations Act. We've also touched on this morning, where we have large companies being forced to make those disclosures within their businesses around their climate risk. So this is a little graph that just gives us a bit of an insight into that, but I'm talking about agriculture and I'm interested in our food processors and resellers. I've got Coles at the end there. Coles meets all of those thresholds for these changes to the Corporations Act. And what we're really interested in, as we've touched on, is that they're going to be interested in what we're doing on farm. They want to know about what's happening in that Scope 3 emissions space, and we're going to need to start being able to show some evidence around that. I don't think we need a lesson on scope in this room, but just, as a way of pointing that out, I guess. Go back, a bit trigger happy here. The food, in terms of like a food processor, they maybe have Scope 1 emissions in terms of what they're doing to produce that product and the emissions that they're creating within their control. Scope 2 is pretty easy because that's just our electricity and energy use. And then that Scope 3 is really what's coming from either the upstream or the downstream part of the supply, and that's where our farming products are coming in. So we really need to report on what we're doing on farm to these bigger companies. So as somebody said before, we may not be those bigger companies, but it's going to affect us. So just imagine you're a farmer at the moment and this is your social media feed. These sort of sustainability issues, climate issues, how we're looking after our land, people want to know about this, and there's no escape in this space. And it feels like some days that there is, people everywhere want to talk to us and know about what's happening in our space. I guess also just on that, and as I said, having been around for a while, I feel like there is a great opportunity at the moment because this also brings so much attention to us, and there's a lot of light shining in this space at the moment in terms of agriculture. So I feel like there are some pretty big opportunities to leverage from some of that interest and make use of that in terms of being able to build more profitable and sustainable farming systems as well. I won't dwell on this one too much. There's lots of text and you may not be able to read it down the back too much. But in terms of those pledges and targets that some of the companies that are concerned with agriculture are setting, if I just take Coles for a moment, so by 2027, their target for Coles is for 75% of suppliers to have an emissions reduction plan. They're not actually saying there that they want to make a specific target around that, but they want us to have a plan. And to have our plan, we really need to understand what our emissions are in the space to begin with. Our industry groups are really setting some good pathways and putting together some really good frameworks around how we're going to meet some of these targets and what might be applicable within each of those industries. Our National Farmers Federation has an aspirational target of net carbon zero by 2050. The red meat industry, which I've done a lot of work in their extension space around the CN30 target. We've also got our wine industry setting some emissions targets and also our grain industry setting some emissions targets, as well as many other industry groups in agriculture. So this kind of brings us to carbon accounting. So remember what I said about data and evidence. Don't tell me, show me. So we need to be really focusing on this in terms of producing the evidence that we need. Carbon also, we talk about carbon a lot, and carbon is one of those terms that's become like the mother word for a lot of these other greenhouse gases that we're dealing with as well. So I talk about carbon accounting, but it's really about capturing the emissions, the whole of the greenhouse gas emissions that we might be producing for a product. So why should I do a carbon account? And I think the key here, and one of the key messages I guess that I'm trying to get across, is that we really need to start with that baseline and have that solid foundation of understanding what our emissions are within farming businesses, within our industries, our agricultural industries, and you could spread that out further. But what's our current impact? A lot of people want to go straight to the target or the goal. A lot of people walk in the door and say, I want to be net zero and I want it to happen, and it's very commendable, but we really need to start with that base first to see where we stand. From there, then we can create the action list that we can implement to get there, but we really need to be able to prioritise those actions, and some of the actions that we have available to us in agriculture may be relevant to some and not to others. So we need to have that understanding of where our emissions are coming from within our different agricultural enterprises to start with, to be able to break that down. And of course we need to track our progress. So if we're repeating our carbon accounting, we can start to see that over time, and we can track our progress in terms of how we're going with our net emissions and emissions intensity of the products that we're producing, and how we're getting towards our goal. And that goal may be, for many in agriculture, it may not be our goal, but it may be our supply chain goal. So I've got a little bit of wheat there, or a bit of crop in my graphic around that baselining piece, and I just want to talk briefly about a project that's happening in South Australia at the moment. It's a project that has been an initiative of Grain Producers SA, and it's really a project around addressing some of the data gaps that we have across the state, and also, though, importantly, I think this project in particular, to engage the growers along the way. Somebody said this morning, actually I think it was the Minister, that we really need, the challenge is really to bring people along on the journey. That is definitely a challenge that we have in agriculture, and why a project like this is really important. Grain Producers SA, or GPSA, have really created this project in response to some of the pressures that we've just gone through in the supply chain. So we've got our export market for grains, and we've got our people that we're selling our product to really wanting to know this data and understand what we're doing. Some of it may not be around specifics, but they want to see us on a pathway. They want to see that we're taking this seriously and that we're making some effort in this space to make our farming more sustainable. And as I said, to be looking after not just in terms of emissions reduction, but being able to look after our land resources and water resources more broadly. So this project's going to gather a lot of information to inform a broader emissions baseline for South Australian grain production. And really, I've got there getting on the front foot, so really being able to control some of the narrative around this. Importantly, the project is funded through the Australian Government's Future Drought Fund and also the Government of South Australia through PIRSA, and their involvement's been great because it means that we can expand from the grains industry into the livestock sector as well. So what's involved in this project? We've got around about 58 to 60 growers in the state that will be selected through an EOI process. We've already begun that process and we have been overwhelmed at the response to those EOIs. So we will be oversubscribed. We won't be able to do all of the growers through this project. We're going to analyse their data over a 3-year period to try and minimise some of that climate and seasonal variability. And the growers will receive an individual report about their business. So in terms of their business, what's the net emissions that they're producing on farm, but also the net emissions, so the emissions intensity for the products that they're producing as well, which is really important as a benchmarking piece. We'll then be collecting that data into a statewide data set, and that will be informing, as I said, part of that, understanding of how we're tracking as a state. And we've also been doing some extension work around this as well. So there has been that bringing people along the journey, and we've been running a few workshops, and we'll also be doing that at the end of the project to impart the learnings onto the growers as well. So one of the things that the growers will get from the project, I said, is that overall net farm emissions. And that's really about the emissions that we're producing on farm minus the carbon that is stored, and we're using the GAF tool, so we're using a vegetation carbon storage aspect there. And that will give us our carbon baseline for each farm. There's no magic wand at the moment. There may be in the future to go out and just sort of take a calculation, have some magic thing that tells you what the greenhouse gas emissions are for a farm. That'd be nice. We are getting probably close to that in some of our satellite technology. But really it's around measuring the inputs and the outputs on farm, and that's how we make those calculations. Importantly, this emissions intensity piece, so the emissions intensity, as I said, how much greenhouse gas is produced per unit of product. So in the case of a grain situation, it would be the amount of greenhouse gases emitted per tonne of grain. And being able to use a metric like that in our farming systems does allow us to do comparisons. So it is a benchmarking tool. As I said, it also allows us to see how efficient we are at producing product. So it's really also an economic measurement as well. And I think that's a really important point to make, is that when we're reducing emissions, we're also reducing the amount of inputs that we're needing to create that product. And so there is an economic benefit to that, and that's something that we really need to still instill as we're talking to farmers to bring them on board in the project. We don't have a total absence of data. We do have a grains baseline for Australia that we do use in the marketplace, which is 315 kilos of greenhouse gases for every tonne of grain. That's a national figure that was done by CSIRO, and that includes all types of grain, so wheat, barley, canola, everything, and it's across Australia. So it does give us something to go on, but we really want to break that up a little bit further. From there, we do have some data sets that are in agroecological zones. They are quite big and broad. The work that was done in that was done by New South Wales DPI, and it has provided us with some ranges for emissions intensity that we can use to compare how we're tracking, more specifically in our smaller regions across the state. But it's still quite broad, and it doesn't cover all our crop types that we have and that we're growing. So that's where this project can provide some of those opportunities. Yes. where we can start to look at what we're growing and how that may compare to some of the ranges that we have for emissions intensity. So on this graph here, basically we've done some comparisons. This is some previous work that we've done for 3 different districts, where we looked at the emissions intensity of growing crops in those districts, and we've compared that to the ranges, the minimum and the maximum ranges of the agroecological zones for their emissions intensity. It doesn't really matter for the purpose of this if we're over and above that, but what we're trying to do is to get a better data set that we have to be able to unpack these numbers a little bit more, because there is a lot of variation, and we're not the same here as Western Victoria. We're not the same here as we are in WA. We need to be able to have some more granular figures on this to make some more decisions about how we're tracking in South Australia. I guess also in terms of opportunities, I was talking about the International Sustainability and Carbon Certification, which is in the grains industry at the moment. If you're selling into that EU market, canola and barley. With that, when you sign up for that, you have to have an emissions reduction plan. And you really can't have that emissions reduction plan without that baseline piece, as I said at the moment. So this project and the work in terms of being able to do carbon accounting in agriculture will contribute to our farming communities being able to meet some of these standards that are being enforced by the supply chain. There are many of these occurring in the marketplace now. So, for instance, Greenhams. So Greenhams is a meat processor from the eastern states, Tassie and Victoria. And they have created their own standard, so their own standard for a specific meat market that they're selling into. They're exporting to that, and they're really trying to create through their supply chain some checks and balances in place to make sure that they can sell that story of where the meat has come from in terms of the way in which it's been produced to meet that standard. So there's a plethora of these coming into the marketplace. And these are the market opportunities that are available to farmers in terms of being able to access some of these maybe seeming like niche markets, but it's becoming more and more quite broad. Then we have reducing emissions and some of the opportunities in there and what growers can do. Because we all want to reduce emissions, but we do need to know where to start. So we need to understand our farming systems in terms of where the emissions are coming from. This is a livestock enterprise example. Most of our emissions are going to be coming through our ruminant livestock, so we've got our methane emissions there. But if we're focusing on, say, our fuel consumption, and we want to make some changes in our fuel consumption there, maybe go to an electrified tractor, that sort of thing, it's not going to make a big difference on this pie chart. It's really, it may make a difference. It's only that very small percentage. I think it's the orange line there, if you can see that. But it's quite a small percentage in that overall piece of pie. So this is just the information that we can get through the data can help us help inform our decisions so that we can make some more effective choices. This is not real data. I met someone from Maitland, so don't take this back to Maitland. But it's based on, I guess, assumptions about the region in terms of a grain production system in that district. And you'll see here that we've got some pretty big fertiliser chunks there. So there's 35% in our fertiliser and urea use there. And we've got this pre-farm scope 3, which is about 32% as well. And that's really coming from the embedded emissions in our fertilisers that we're using in that grain production system. So they're pretty big chunks of the pie. I was quite interested when Sam was talking about how we may be able to use our renewables in terms of producing green ammonia in the state. I have talked about a few examples in the past, but I think there's some real opportunities there if we can get that price point right so that we can make some differences in this pie in terms of carving down some of these big chunks and getting some of that. He talked about export supply, but we need some domestic supply for that as well. And there's people in the room here that I'm sure, have lots of ideas about what we can do in terms of transitioning agriculture and still having solutions that don't pose a threat to our productivity or our profitability. And I've just thrown up a few things here just to note. Easing apprehension, I think, in agriculture is a big thing at the moment. So I think if we can think about what we can do in our regions to be able to contribute to that would be awesome. I've talked about these statewide data sets or having that more granular data available so that we can make more informed decisions, use that for our benchmarking, and this is becoming part of the norm. So we're benchmarking every year in terms of our productivity outputs in farming, and just benchmarking our emissions is just going to become part of the norm of that as well. We do need to take the carbon blinkers off. There was some discussion about the nature repair market bill that's coming into play. That's a really exciting space. Trialling some of our low emissions farming systems and modelling the change from that would be really, really interesting. A lot of that work is happening, but it'd be great to get to that a little bit more at the moment. And also telling our stories, and really a lot of the work that I do is about helping corporate ag and large organisations tell those sustainability stories. It would be awesome to do that more. Low emissions production of our inputs would be really good. I've said that there. And then just really quickly, lastly, I think I'm getting the hurry up here, that this large-scale landscape revegetation projects, and just really quickly, nerds like me read things like this. So this is the Northern and York Regional Drought Resilience Plan. Down there in the fine print is some actions and suggested things to go forward, including a region-wide greening master plan. So with my Landcare hat on, I get excited about that, and I'd really love for some of that to jump out of the page and actually become reality. That would be awesome. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Yes, we will have questions in the panel session, which is coming up. Please that you could share your work with us with Grain Producers SA. Sarah will now join us on the panel session, so please have your questions ready. We've got Caroline Rose, CEO of Primary Producers SA, Professor Andrew Beer, the Executive Dean of the University of South Australia Business, and Kate Hart, Executive Director of Environment, Heritage and Sustainability. So if you would like to make your way up to the centre stage, that would be lovely. We have a great array of experience here, so please have your questions ready. I think we've got a microphone down. We have the microphone there. Kate, I understand that in addition to leading states teams on net zero transition for DEW, I think it is, you are the President of SA Division of the National Director of Planning of the Institute of Australia. Can you kick us off by outlining how the state government has prepared for this collaboration and transition?
Thanks very much. I think at the outset, it's very important to recognise the commitment that the state government is making in terms of the green transition. We have a Premier who is absolutely committed to repositioning the state nationally and internationally. And if you have heard him speak, he does liken it to the Playford era, that, you know, we need to re-engineer the state. We need to re-engineer the state so that we can capitalise on the future markets. We have a really great story to tell. As has been identified throughout today, I think the state has actually relied on energy, and the energy transition has been phenomenal. But we actually have to move to other areas and other markets. It's clear that the gross domestic product of the state has increased. So over the last 30-odd years, it's increased by about 25-30%. And at the same time, our energy reliance on fossil fuels has gone down by about 42%. That's a great story, but we actually have to transition that story into other areas. And that's really the focus of the state, undertaking its net zero strategy an approach, talking to industry and businesses through industry climate change conferences, identifying what the green economy looks like and having a state economic plan that's founded on green economy principles. And the work that's been presented today through the Minister and Sam Crafter and others in terms of suggesting that we can build the economy. We suggest that through the work that we've done with Deloitte, that the green economy is probably going to be worth something around $220 billion in the future. We have to capture that. And we are really primed to be able to do that through not only government investment but private investment. And I guess my last point, actually, Mike, is that government is a facilitator and it can invest and has been investing, but we actually need all sectors on this journey, and we can establish the policy and the principles that sit behind it, the legislative foundations that sit behind it, and we can encourage, but we certainly need everybody in this room and others to invest and recognise that their role in the green economy is just as important.
Thanks very much for that, Kate. Caroline, how do you reckon competing land use will impact on agriculture and other industries? We've got so many industries here today. How do they all fit on the one space, I guess you could say?
That's a great question, Mike. And I think when we talk about growing the economy, let's not lose sight of the contribution that South Australia's primary industries currently makes. $18.5 billion to the gross state product, 78,000 full-time equivalent roles. More than 50% of South Australia's merchandise exports is derived from our primary industries. I think the way in which we need to look into the opportunities that clearly are presented, given our vast solar expansion, looking at all our potential for renewable energy, is to also recognise that that productivity ostensibly is derived from 4% of our land mass. We only have 4% of arable land in this state. So clearly there is a value assigned not only to the current economic contribution that primary industries make, not only to our contribution to global food and fibre production to feed a growing world population, but also the role that agriculture plays in managing that landscape, because we've got scarce resources, and I think it does come down to effective planning. We're under huge pressure. We've had the release of the Greater Adelaide Regional Plan that will see 316,000 new dwellings built potentially on a proportion of that scarce arable land. We've got competing mining and energy projects. We've got the new renewable energy, hydrogen renewable energy bill that will enable state acquisition of land to accelerate large-scale renewable projects on freehold land. At the moment, the focus is, as it should be, in this part of the world, and the coexistence of pastoral leases with not only energy projects but also conservation and potentially carbon farming. But what we need to see is agriculture around the table in those decisions, because we have such scarce resources. Our industry is exposed to climate change. We are on the front line. And there is a huge opportunity for our industry to make a contribution to offsetting those emissions. But what I want to see is that value captured for our producers. I think it's brilliant that we're looking at carbon accounting on farm, but we can't lose sight that we can't just keep adding cost to doing business in this state. We need to keep our producers profitable, and we can't just keep adding layers of complexity without seeing that benefit. Carbon as an opportunity should be in setting to enable our products to be in a position to be globally competitive. We're trade exposed. Our consumers, our international markets are demanding action on emissions reduction, and we should be proudly asserting the role that agriculture can play. But we can't do that if we don't have land and water resources and the security of tenure to undertake our business.
Thanks very much for that, Caroline. Professor Andrew Beer, your comments or your thoughts on competing land use?
Yeah, I think, as a number of speakers today have said, and as we heard in the comments just then, is that really we're in a position where we can walk and chew gum at the same time. It doesn't have to be one or the other. It's only a small amount of the land area of the state which is actually used for arable farming at the moment, and clearly it needs to be respected and honoured. And part of that is in terms of sharing power and responsibility. I think that also then speaks to a broader challenge around collaboration. So we need to have more people involved in these discussions. So we develop a shared understanding as a state, as a set of communities. We need discussions that cross boundaries between industries so that people can understand the position people are taking. I think it's entirely correct that we draw attention to the additional costs primary producers may face as we go about changing our economy. Because only by having a shared understanding can we find solutions. So we actually need more of these sorts of discussions with a wider array of participants in order to get to that point, so we can actually protect all forms of land use in the way they should be protected.
Sarah, just on the points that you raised, which are all very valid and very contemporary, but people in this room and elsewhere might see we're having a horrible year this year. They've got enough problems as they have, either financially, mentally, everything else, to worry about carbon capture and auditing of their properties. Do you cut people some slack, farmers slack for that?
Absolutely. It's a really difficult piece when there are some significant challenges in terms of the seasonality and the economics that we're facing at the moment in a lot of our agricultural industries. I think, though, what we're seeing through the markets is this space is just not going away, and it's not necessarily I just won't worry about this now, because you may not be able to enter a market without worrying about this now. So I think that's changing a little bit in agriculture. I really feel that farmers really want to be able to produce product, to produce it sustainably, and they really want to be able to be good stewards of the resources that they have. Everybody wants to be in that space, to be doing good things. So I hear the comments about the cost recovery and where that's going to come from, and a lot of that being lumped and a lot of the burden being lumped with farmers, and I completely understand that. And I think that we do need to do more in that space of supporting farmers, and also finding some better mechanisms for farmers to compete in some of those market spaces where they are being challenged in their environmental credentials, and so having some better frameworks or mechanisms that government can be able to provide on their behalf to be able to meet those markets as well.
Thanks for that. Do we have a question? Yes.
Thank you. My question is just in regard to the ACCUs, the carbon credits. There's a very long lead time between when you say you're interested in a project and going right through the process of an audit. It's we're still 4 years into the track before even our first audit. My question is that when mandatory reporting comes in, it's going to highlight a very big gap between the demand for ACCUs for those 215 big emitters that have decided that they can't reduce their emissions by 43% and will be offsetting in buying ACCUs. I had a visit from one of the largest emitters only a few weeks ago, and they have realised they can't meet the 43%, and they need to offset a lot of their emissions, and their demand was greater than the entire business of our carbon provider. That's just one of 215 big emitters. So my question is, how are we going to solve those issues? Because there's a very long lead time, and even for those big pastoral stations on the bigger areas to get carbon projects, it takes a long time to get the fencing in, to get the goats removed and the whole process. So I just see a really big issue, and just I'm interested in the panel's thoughts of how we're going to solve those sort of problems.
Yeah, great question. Caroline, we'll start with you.
Thank you. I think that's a really good point, and we've seen a big focus around the statutory market creation through ACCUs. So the integrity of some of those calculations and the methodology, we need to recognise this is an evolving science and that we're refining that we need a system that does give that integrity, because my concern is that as our knowledge and our understanding in the markets themselves mature, we may be in a position where potentially we've given away a considerable competitive advantage by having our producers signing up potentially to contracts or schemes that either don't meet those higher standards and have the integrity underpinning them that the market and potentially government will demand, or potentially they're in a position where they're needing to then enter the market themselves in order to meet some of those commitments. I think it's really dangerous when we start framing carbon as a commodity market that is somehow going to create rivers of gold. This is something I think we need to really debunk and do that quickly, because when producers are being approached to participate in schemes, just like any other commodity market, there's risk involved. There's contract commitments, and there's also considerable penalties embedded in those contracts and washout prices and exposure that might be created. So I think the role of government in supporting farmers to understand that, to potentially look at the opportunities, but also more importantly, understand that risk is critical. And I think that's where the collaborative efforts of both PIRSA and DEW, working to establish the carbon farming roadmap that was released by the Minister last year, is a really critical piece. And some of the extension work that we're now seeing and funded by government and undertaken by consultants such as Pinion in conjunction with the industry is really important in getting a better handle on this. But I'd just say that I think we can't just rush to a solution here in order to meet an ambition or a target. We need to actually understand the integrity of those markets and also understand that you can't account for carbon credits twice. So we've got to really look at supporting producers and pastoralists for seeing the opportunities, but also giving free, confidential and independent advice to enable them to make that assessment for their own enterprise.
Thank you. Kate?
I certainly agree with what Caroline's indicated. The carbon market is an evolving market, and as Caroline rightly pointed out, we are working with PIRSA in terms of developing up carbon farming roadmap and just how we actually work with the Commonwealth on that market. They are long-term goals, but we do know that we can't get to a zero emissions target without the carbon market. And as much investment as people would like to put into emissions reductions, it's going to be extremely difficult, almost impossible, to do that without actually recognising the value of carbon. The government has introduced new legislation to facilitate conservation approaches on pastoral land, recognising that a foundation needs to be placed to provide an opportunity. But we've certainly got, I think, work to do in terms of how that's implemented and undertaken in a balanced way.
Thank you very much. Andrew?
Yeah, I think one of the things we've heard today is if you measure things, you can change things. And in this instance, measurements obviously being tied to legislative requirements as well. I can't help but take the long view and think that there must be a limit to how much we can carbon farm in terms of our sequestering of fossil carbon. And that's something that Richard actually referred to earlier today. So I agree with the comments you've already heard in response, but I also think in the longer term, this is going to force those polluters to find alternative ways of sequestering the carbon they're emitting. It's going to force innovation, it's going to force change. Now, I don't know what those changes are going to be, but I think they'll go through a process of exploring different technologies, different options, and potentially eventually landing on a solution quite quickly. And that's good for the planet.
Sarah, just on that point, and also the issue of can existing businesses and future businesses which are carbon capture focused, and I think I've asked this in a different form, but is there room for all of this on the planet? It seems to me that we have so much that we already have and so much that we want to do, it's going to get very crowded.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I have the answer to how we deal with that overcrowding. completely hear you, I think, on do we have the offsets available for these big industries. Just in terms of agriculture, and maybe to flesh out that insetting piece a little bit more. So, here in South Australia, we have some of the most efficient farmers in the world, and we're growing products, food products with pretty low rainfalls on soil types that are inherently low in soil carbon. And so we are already, dealing with being very efficient at what we do and being able to get the most and the maximum we can out of the inputs that we're putting on. And we're doing that really well, and we're doing that really well when we compare that on the global scale. So where we have to go in agriculture right now, we don't have a lot of tweaks. We've got some, but there's no one magic silver bullet. So we need to do a range of different things. And we do need to look at the insetting piece in terms of our agricultural industries and being able to use the carbon that we're storing and capturing on farm in our story about our sustainability for our agricultural industries.
Do we have any other questions from the floor? Everyone's a bit post-lunchy sort of maybe. Ladies and gentlemen, in that case, thank you very much to our panel. Now, moving on, it's been really enlightening. I now invite Mandy Masters from MTA Group to give us a quick update on workforce incentives and practical recruitment for our workforce. I think Mandy would like me to drop the microphone slightly. Oh, unless you've got an angle grinder, I don't think I can do that.
Thank you. I never feel tall enough for these things. Thanks very much, Mike. And thank you very much, Kellyanne, for providing us this spot this afternoon. When I heard that the summit was on, it was perfect timing for us after being awarded the contract to deliver the new energy mentoring program for South Australia and Victoria. So I just wanted to just start with something that Honorary Claire Scriven had said last night and again today, that we've heard a couple of times. And she talked about leadership. And it's significant really because it's common knowledge that South Australia is leading the way in renewables and notably very, very quickly. There's a lot of fast growth here. It's because of everybody in this room. It's because of you, it's because of us. We are all having an impact and we're all leaders in our own right. And that's why we're here. So when I hung up my boots earlier this year, finishing a long career in the mining industry, my retirement lasted about a week, which was the best week of my life. No, not really. I have a very invested passion. I've been working, have a career in this region with over 25 years. And when Bernadette O'Connor, our Executive Director, contacted me regarding the contract we'd just been awarded through the Department of Education and Workplace Relations around the New Energy Apprenticeship Mentoring Program, it was a no-brainer for me. My investment in passion in the region meant that I had to be the person to help roll that out across the South Australian region. So the New Energy Apprenticeship Mentoring Program is delivered in Victoria and it's also delivered in South Australia. So if I can also just acknowledge our traditional custodians as well of the country in which we live and work and recognise continuing connections to land, waters and communities. We pay our respects to our elders past, present and emerging. Here we go. Here we go. So Australian Renewables Academy. It's the new energy apprenticeship mentor provider. We call ourselves NEAM for short, if you like acronyms, delivering the Australian Apprentices Services, which is funded by DEWA. This funding is set to establish and deliver an innovative new energy apprenticeships mentoring program with a goal to empower apprentices with the tools and connections they need to thrive in the renewable energy. Just a little bit about ARA, the Australian Renewables Academy. It's an industry-led approach to creating skills, training and workforce development for our renewable energy future and new energy workforce. We understand that the importance of supporting the retention of our apprentices, which we all know is a little bit lower, and we would like to increase that, particularly now in the new energy sector, and assisting them in building exciting new careers. So Australia's renewable energy developments are happening in regional, rural and remote areas. We all know that, creating substantial opportunities for apprentices in this clean energy sector. The mentoring program provides incentives to support and encourage more people into the new energy sector. The apprenticeship program covers around about 40 different occupations, and the new energy apprentice support payment worth up to $10,000 over the course of their apprenticeship. And that's to support them in working and training in the priority occupations. Priority occupations obviously is a list of about 40. It might slightly change, as with everything that we're going through at the moment. New energy apprentices, we match the apprentices with experienced and skilled industry mentors. This provides individualised guidance and advice along their career pathways. It supports the apprentices and mentors to meet, at least once a month. That can be different, it can be longer, it can be shorter, it can be whatever those needs look like. It provides access to local peer networking events as well, focusing on new energy industry revolution and the emerging career opportunities. So this slide here, when we talk about those 40 priority, this is basically a snapshot of what some of those new energy careers look like. And you can see that it's quite varied. We're not just talking about installing solar panels or working on a solar farm. We've got automotive technicians because they're working on EV vehicles. You might be somebody working in carpentry or building, and everything we do in that space has to meet the energy ratings, so it fits the new energy box. The civil engineering, there's a few things on here that you might not think meet that. Glaziers, mechanical draftsperson, there's a whole range of things. So it's really about creating awareness across the region. We're working very closely with educators, apprenticeship providers, TAFEs, local businesses and people within the industry to really get this knowledge out there and make sure that we link up our apprentices and encourage our mentors to come on board as well. A little bit about mentors. Mentors, people that are going to provide some peer support. Volunteer mentors are drawn from our growing extensive clean energy and industry networks. They could be local businesses, councils, industry specialists, suppliers, community members, whoever fit that clean energy category. Mentors are obviously adequately trained, supported and carefully paired up with apprentices so that we can maximise the mutual learning growth and support that these apprentices require to be successful in their journey and their pathway. And just popping back to a little bit more about leadership as well, and if I'm going to mention the man in the room who's been mentioned a few times today, Mr. Craig. Craig has come on board as one of our South Australian mentors as well. So, we're really looking for people that are local within our region, within our area, within those industries that can be key people for our apprentices to link up with. So thank you very much for that, Craig. Our mentors are invited to all of our ARA events, and they have access to a lot of all the up-to-date information around the new energy industry as well. So it gives them opportunities to expand their professional and social networks in that area. Gain new perspectives if needed, help build solid pipelines and contribute to the development of our new energy workforce. And we all know how much we're striving to really develop that workforce within our region so that it can support all of these exciting projects that we're moving into. Make a difference basically to the lives and the careers of those young people that are venturing into that pathway. So if you are interested in joining the program as a new energy mentor, or know of someone, we would really welcome you to connect with us. It's a great opportunity at the moment for us to obviously share this information, and we'd be really interested in you having a chat to us. And I know that there's many, many people in this room today that would fit those boxes, and we're looking for mentors that are going to support us across a whole array of different types of the industry as well, so we can capture a lot of those areas in that group of that 40 priority list. So I only had a very small window so that it'd keep everybody on time today. So hopefully that's... But if you'd like to connect with us, the QR code here will take you straight to our website. And this QR code is really important because it's access to both our mentors and our apprentices. And it's the way that you connect with us so that we can engage with you and support those services. So yeah, please grab that. Otherwise, contact me. And thank you very much for your time today. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you very much, Mandy. Now moving right along, and we're right back on time, which is great. Keenan Jackson is the Economic Development Specialist with ID Informed Decisions, who, as our summit partners today, we thank very much for their support. Keenan is going to give us some insights into what has been occurring in the regional South Australian economy. Thank you very much. Please make welcome Keenan Jackson.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to set my timer so I don't go over it as well. We're very honoured and we're happy to be invited here to be a proud sponsor of this summit. We love the RDAs basically, and we find, so ID Informed Decisions, we work with councils all across Australia. You may have come across our tools before. Basically, they're online demographic, economic, housing profiles. We do community views as well. We do population forecasting. We really work with regions and local councils. We find RDAs are very strong in South Australia. Some states they're a bit less strong because the state government has a bit more of an involvement there, but definitely in Queensland and South Australia, they're great ambassadors for regions, advocates for the projects going on, and they love our data as well, and we provide it to them. So today I'm going to skim across some trends and everything. I know everyone here comes from their own region. You probably know it well more than me, someone who's based in Melbourne who's just come across here for the day. But we do study a lot of different regions. And I just want to intro today is I've enjoyed the presentation so far. And I thought a little bit something that are missing, and we touched on the last thing, is the workforce. Where's the workforce coming for some of these projects that are going to be built? There wasn't much talking about training and education. What is great to see is these technical colleges being built in Mount Gambier and these places, which some of the other states that we do work with, I haven't seen that kind of relationship, kind of preparation for the future of projects coming forward. The other thing we'll say is we work with Queensland, WA, different councils everywhere, and it's a very competitive space. So while you can be very positive about what's going on here, I'll tell you, I go to Queensland, they're just as positive about the projects going now. I go to WA, they're just as positive as well, and it's all a big race. The other thing as well is a lot of these major projects, I did some work for Darwin, gas project a few years ago. Minister came out at the time and said, this is going to set us up for future, create jobs forever. They built the project, house prices went through the roof, no one could get an air ticket into them, tourism went down, project finished, everyone left. And the amount of jobs that, in terms of maintaining that operation afterwards, was way lower than what people talked. So always be a bit sceptic of big numbers that people spruik for these things, and it's about, as you would know, planning for the long term and also planning for housing. The other thing I touched on is we work with Ashburton in WA, another thing, big gas project there, pretty much no housing for them, so they stayed on sites of all the big companies. Then they had left Ashburton, had the largest population decline between the 2016 and 2021 censuses. Everyone went back, and partly difference to some of the other neighbouring LGAs was they just didn't build any local housing and didn't have any long-term solutions for trying to maintain that population after these projects finish. But today I'm here to talk about some trends. If you ever want to check out our data, this will be a link if the presentation's sent around afterwards. That goes straight to the RDSA site where you can drill down to each region. So the national story, I'm not going to touch too much on this, but we're in a period of decline. Economy's still growing, but we've had 4 quarters of negative GRP per capita growth, which generally means that your welfare's in decline. Some would say, yeah, that's mainly, population led by international students coming in and stuff, but there's certain states in Australia, particularly like Victoria and even Queensland recently, where their population is actually not keeping up with their GRP growth. Unemployment's trending up, hasn't back up as much as we thought, considering the population growth there, but it is easing and job vacancies are easing as well. You'll know CPI's kind of, we've gone to a monthly cycle CPI announcements for the ABS now, which is welcome rather than the quarterly one. The recent one dipped below within that target band, so we are easing off a bit, but inflation is still high in non-discretionary things we can't avoid spending money on, so it's still a problem to low-income earners. This is an interesting one here. All the jobs growth in the year March to March pretty much was in the what we call the non-market sector, education and health. Hardly anything actually. Ours went backwards in the private sector, which was a contrast to the year before. So when people say about pretty much it's government propping up the economy, it's pretty much true in a lot of especially the bigger states. Region by region, this is data. So unfortunately in Australia we get our national counts a year pass. So this is data for 22-23, which is like a year ago. We got the national counts recently, then we get the state accounts in a couple of months' time, and then what we do at ID is we produce small area accounts early next year. But this was the situation, what was it, a year ago now, so quite very strong growth. South Australia I talked around a lot of other states, I was saying you went through a bit of a boom period after quite a slow growth comparatively to the other states for a large period of time. This is change in state final demand. It's actually not 4-quarter summed, it's quarter to quarter. So you can see South Australia's eased off a bit there. Darwin, Northern Territory's gone back up, so they went decline and then they've gone back up because of oil and gas exports and a bit more construction. WA, we're getting a bit more construction through there and a bit more exploration activity. Unemployment rates, so yeah, still pretty good. Victoria's ticking up because population growth has been extremely strong in that area there. Tasmania's unemployment hasn't risen up even though the economy is not growing. It's because people have left. So if your labour force drops down, then it kind of balances out. There's not enough people. But generally, most places are ticking up. CPI, you're almost leading the country there. That's Adelaide, so it's done by city base, 4.5%. So you expect that in general, and you know South Australia, we've had a period of economic growth here. You've had then housing prices go up as well, and generally across the board you've had inflation related, contributed by housing, and we're seeing the same in Western Australia, in Perth there as well. This is our data from last year. This really, we show the graph sometimes to show that actually, 14 out of the top 24 performing LGAs on an annual basis were in regional areas. So regionally was growing, had a few good years of growth due to a bit better prices for mining commodities and also some good agricultural production years, but also some growth there. 2 up there, there's been a few big projects. The duplication of the bridge in Port Augusta led to some construction boosts there. Regional South Australia, this is where I talk about here. So, as you can see there, quite a stark jump up in that last few years on an economic level. And GRP per capita has also been very positive. And that's what we've seen across Australia, is that actually regions on a their output to how much population is pretty good, whereas the metro areas is going back. Metro is all about a population kind of story for most of them and trying to keep up with that population. And of course, all that's government spending on infrastructure to deal with it. So once again, this was a year ago, but generally in regional South Australia, construction contributed the most to the change. Mining, so we had copper prices quite high, helped there, good agricultural production. Hospitality, this was still kind of a COVID bounce back year, so we had some growth in accommodation and food there. Population growth, look at that. I mean, everywhere, you read a newspaper was going strong all across Australia there as overseas migration came back. And we've got, interesting, a lot of regional areas also had some really strong overseas migration. Then there's that constant kind of domestic migration from capital cities outwards. Strong pipeline approvals. Whether or not they're actually getting built is a different story. That's another one that's across Australia. Very strong approvals. That was pumped up by low interest rates and federal government policies to encourage housing approvals, but the actual rate of completions hasn't really changed at all. So all these states have massive housing targets, but we're not going to meet them because things aren't getting built because of labour constraints, cost of supply, etc. And also, I mean, a lot of the housing ones are competing with massive government projects in the larger metro areas who are paying reasonably good rates. I'm just going to dig into the different regions now. So, the whole reason ID, or Informed Decisions, was established 27 years ago was the absence, or small area data, basically. So our founder basically worked for state governments and was like, where's all this small area data? We can get great data on states, great data on national economy, but where is the local area data in a useful manner that we can actually use to help us inform decisions and planning and everything? So that's where we started, and that's where we still go at the moment. So we present census data in a way that anyone can use. It's freely online published, so your community planners can use it, local businesses can use it, strategic planners, and we also present economic data. Hardly anyone in Australia produces local area economic data. Most of the employment data is where people live. It's residence-based. We try to estimate where the actual jobs are as well, and that difference between residents and actual jobs over time. It's a hard process because we have to make a lot of assumptions and modelled. And some people complain, your data's all modelled. Well, it's the best we can do because at the moment, even on what's called a SA4 level, sub-state level, up until just recently, it was all done through the ABS labour force survey, which the sample size is quite low in a lot of places there, and you're running off very, very, poor estimates in a lot of places because the survey sample's so low. Fortunately, the ABS this year started to integrate other data sets, one of them being payrolls data, which they started to use during COVID times, and they're bringing in a bit more taxation data and other things, and they've produced this year modelled estimates using those other data sources to get a better estimate of employment at a small area level. What that means is, if you're looking at your regions, don't be surprised if your unemployment rate changes quite a bit over the next year because there'll be a big adjustment. We've already adjusted these kind of SA4 levels. There will be adjustment at the LGA level. So if you're working local council or RDAs, you might see a big change in your unemployment as that rolls through. But these are our best estimates at the moment. So RDA Far North, big. Once again, this is last year. So hopefully, early next year we'll have what happened in the 23-24 financial year. But pretty good year because of the mining and agriculture and stuff. Some big projects there. I've got the building approvals, so a strong pipeline. You'll know that the Technical College is one of the bigger projects coming up there, and that'll, that's going to set you up for the future in terms of the workforce. The other thing I kind of touched on is with some of these big projects, they require a lot of technical skills, and if you don't have them here, they're going to come from your capital cities or you're going to bring them from overseas. So most of the big gas and mining projects in WA and in Queensland, it's actually overseas migration. So skilled people come in from South Africa and the UK and everything and work on projects because we just don't have the skills here. The other thing I find with those projects as well, the big ones, is that a lot of them is people talk about mining being, it's a regional thing. I went to a conference 2 years ago, Developing Northern Australia conference, and everyone talked about the regions, the mining in the regions. And then most of the day's presentations was how I can run my mine from my office in Perth or somewhere else, and how do we deal with our Fifield population with all the workers actually flying in from suburbs in Rockingham and Mandurah. And to me, I got an impression that actually mining is a city-based actual industry. Majority of the workforce actually live in the city and just come in and out, and with all the automation of trains and some of their mining equipment and the oil rigs and stuff like that, a lot of it is done city-based at the moment, and potentially with AI and other things in renewables and some of these projects and hydrogen projects, a lot of it will require city-based skills and everything. Your bit benefit here in terms of proximity to Adelaide is a bit closer than WA, but that's something that could happen. It may not actually generate most of the regional skills regional jobs unless you work on the skills. I've done a bit of, talked about the big projects here, but everyone's talked about them today, so I'm not going to touch on them too much. There's a lot going on here. In terms of the short-term outlook, livestock exports are forecast by the state to be boosted a little bit because US demand is going quite well. There's potential for an increased uranium demand because there's still reactors being built in India and China as well, who's going to need some of that source. There's expansion projects with BHP and stuff, quite a big investments that potentially to come on board. RDA Hills and Coasts, it's quite different. As you know, every region is quite different there. For this region here, it's a population growth story. You see most of the building approvals are residential building approvals. Mount Barker is included in Greater Adelaide, but if it wasn't, it'd be Australia's 39th largest regional city and climbing up the ladder basically because it's seen exceptional growth in population in the last few years, and with that comes then all the facilities required to catch up. New primary schools, new hospitals, the aquatic centre, potentially changes to the city centre. So a lot of that is around servicing residential development. The other thing for the region, we'll touch on some other places, is wine. It cuts across a lot of regions as well. Wine exports have, increased a little bit, but the forecast to fall or be flat. There's actually a bit of decrease in consumption of wine globally, even though China's removed the tariffs. Actually, they're drinking less wine. Actually, so it may not have the benefit that we expected with the bounce back there. RDA Barossa, same thing there, as I said. There's a mixture. So RDA Barossa is a mixture of agriculture, you get the benefits, and then residential development as you get closer to, around Gawler and Adelaide Plains, closer to Adelaide. So a similar there you get population growth with all the facilities required for that. A recreation park is there, another school expansion, so that's funding some of the bigger projects there. So population servicing. So it's a lot of their growth depends on these land developments, which was talked about today, which also require your access to sewerage and water and all these sort of things. So when they come on board, we'll be dependent on that. The crop production, which I'll talk about some other regions there, people said today, dry conditions forecast going ahead, which have an effect. The big development potentially there is the new Two Wells town centre, which had it's estimated 100 million plus. That'd be a huge boost to local jobs and development. I'm going to have to speed up a bit. Limestone Coast, a bit strong growth once again there, but due to agriculture. Some of the big projects, the recreation centre was built a couple of years ago. That was that big approval there. New technical college there. There's been actually $100 million worth of industrial buildings, so a fairly consistent pipeline of industrial buildings in the last 3 years that'll feed through. Potential the Green Triangle pellet mill. It will boost construction jobs. There's a bit of ongoing. So around there, it's obviously timber. If the battery storage project, a lot of these projects are in proposal form, but if they come on board, then they can change local areas quite considerably in a short amount of time. Murraylands, obviously the massive project there a few years ago was the rebuild after the fire for the processing plant. And I read that they've just signed a new agreement with a company in China. So if that goes on forward, it'll boost exports in the area. Water supply is a big thing there. So we've done a work with a couple of councils there looking at, their constraints on development due to water supply. And that cuts across a lot of councils as well in terms of they feel that they can build more, open more land for development, residential development, as long as they get that water situation sorted. Eyre Peninsula, big secondary college was built. That was the development a couple of years ago. There's a few more education facilities there. I'm going to have to quickly go along. We've talked about the big hydrogen days, so I'm not going to talk about that. RDA York, we've probably talked about that as well. There's a big project that's been stalled, for a couple of years at Wallaroo Shores. And interesting for some of these places here, and if we talk about Wallaroo, I'm probably not pronouncing it correctly, but for some places across Australia, we see, there's a demographic change, and I looked at that region there, the Copper Coast. Their median age between 2016 and 2021 went up by 4 or 5 years. So that's an ageing population, and these lifestyle destinations for them, it's kind of people move in, and it's going to place constraints in the years going on health facilities and aged care facilities. Some people plan for that, some people just move, and then a couple of years later they demand for the facilities that are not there. So for a lot of councils, actually, the biggest drivers of growth is actually healthcare. Okay, so generally going forward, across this nation, and I've looked at budgets across state by state, most of the states is pretty similar in terms of predicting a slowing down in growth for the next 2 years before then increasing. Some of them have built in the new migration kind of targets that are being talked about, whether they eventuate or not, so they've built that into their lower population numbers going forward. But yeah, generally everyone thinks it's going to decline for a couple of years and go up. So it's quite similar actually. If you pull all the budget forecasts for most states, they're pretty similar in terms of the trends. Short-term wise, forecast a weaker crop production due to the drier conditions that people have talked about today. Pretty low confidence in a number of the surveys. South Australia reported the lowest confidence levels in the country in the Rabobank's survey this year. So that'll obviously be challenging. Livestock exports, but that's the growth in the US, as you see. The estimates for the latest financial year is very strong growth in the US and some of the Middle Eastern countries. That's that China thing there. So China, you can see the big dip in wine exports and then a bit of the increase. But the consumption volume, the second graph there, is they're just drinking less wine. So if we encourage them to drink more, but that's goes, of course, to income levels as well, and China's going through a bit of a challenge there. Copper exports is, the transition, which we talked about today, is forecast to lead to an explosion or continued demand for that, which will prop it up in the next couple of years. Uranium forecast to continue to grow as well, as I talked about. I'll leave it there in that 20 minutes. But generally speaking, South Australia is in a really good period of time that hasn't been for a number of years. And it's how you kind of seize that opportunity. And what everyone's talked about Australia today is that the states seem to have a pretty good plan and a pretty good positive outlook for growth and a kind of, I hate to say it, but a vision or something that people can get behind, positively get behind. And that means a lot, basically, to if you're always talking about it depressing and our economy's not growing, it's slow, we can't compete with other states and everything, that feeds a general mood, and then people say, I don't want to move there. Whereas I go to states now, and I'm talking up South Australia as well, and people are seeing it as an option to move to, which I don't think they would have maybe 5 years ago to move to South Australia. They always considered, I'll go to WA or Queensland or everything. So it's in a pretty good state. It's how you keep this momentum going, and each region is quite different. And for some of the regions here today, some of this, the hydrogen stuff and the net zero, probably for some of the councils, it doesn't mean too much for them because they're dealing with other stuff, and their biggest concerns are, like Mount Barker, is population growth, or it's an ageing population. We work with a lot of agricultural, rural-based local governments, and they're dealing with population decline. And, they're strategically planning for the workforce going forward, and they've modelled how many retirements are going to happen, leaving the farming industry and stuff, and no one's coming through to fill those positions as well, and they're kind of playing catch-up in terms of how they're going to address that lack of skills going forward. But I'll leave it there today. Feel free to check out our websites, and you can find a lot of range of data on your regions. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Keenan, for that. Highlighting the work of RDAs and the needs of regional South Australia. Today, the three CEOs of the North are joining us, and they've taken the theme of the future of regional South Australia literally, and are going to share some work and thoughts around. Now, this was in the notes, but I'm not quite sure that there's not a typo here. It says the childcare desert across South Australia, Northern Australia. I think it might be the childcare desert across Northern South Australia. Might be the desert, I don't know. Curl, was it? You hit one too many S's? Yeah. Join me in welcoming our host CEO from Far North, Claire Wiseman, our southern suburbs today in York and Mid-North CEO Daniel Wilson, and last but not least from Eyre Peninsula and Far West, Ryan Viney. This is a particularly topical given the release of the Commonwealth Government report on access to childcare last week. Now, the three of them would like to come up here. I don't know how you want to do this, if you want to sit out if you're not on for, you've got 5 minutes each, and I'm going to be really strict on time. So I guess you already knew that, Claire. Away you go.
Excellent, thanks Mike. So let's commence this run home, shall we? As Lindley, Sam and Craig have all spoken about this morning, the Far North region and the Upper Spencer Gulf is experiencing significant growth. The investment pipeline in our region, our RDA region alone, totals $11.2 billion in investment, creating a bit over 10,500 jobs in construction, 3,651 jobs ongoing. And our neighbouring RDAs and the rest of the state RDAs have pipelines of equally significant numbers. Noting the scepticism that Keenan advised you earlier, I would just also add that the projects in the pipeline are in various stages of their development and their viability. But even if only half of those projects come off, that's still significant and enormous growth in the regions, creating business and employment opportunities. But as positive as this growth is, it also creates significant pressure on our facilities and services and those organisations involved in delivering those, as well as those providing the environments which go towards enabling the viability of those service providers, such as the RDAs, local government, state and federal. So it's no surprise to you all in the room, I'm sure, that one of those services which is providing a real challenge to us all is childcare. The three RDAs, Far North, York Mid-North and Eyre Peninsula, have all taken a leading role in our respective regions in regard to this challenge, and we'll be giving you a brief overview of the stages that we are at in this work across our regions. In the Far North, our RDA committee recognised the need for some coordinated work across the region to support our local government, our industry groups and providers in advocating for solutions to address the needs. Our committee engaged an expert to undertake a supply and demand analysis with next step actions for our region and its key stakeholders. A summary of the data is on the slide there. The full report will be available next week on our website, so I'd encourage you all to have a look. But it's no surprise our region is also added to the childcare desert with one childcare place per 4.5 children across our region. The issues to why aren't unique to our region, but they impact differently across the entirety of the region, ranging from Cooper Pedy, which has great services, but doesn't have the children filling available spaces, which threatens their viability, through to Corn, which has no childcare services at all. So you've got parents getting up early in the morning, bringing their children into Port Augusta, putting them in childcare for the day, then returning back to Corn in order to start their day's work, and at the end of the day having to go back and pick them up. So this adds additional pressure on the services at Port Augusta, which are already generally has an undersupply of places and a 2-year waiting period in some areas. Suffice to say, without the services that meets the demand, we struggle to attract and retain the people needed for our growth, as well as putting further strain on our existing population. For our RDA, undertaking this work enabled research across our 4 councils and the Outback Communities Authority, providing data that can be used individually by each council, but can also be used collectively across the region. The added value in undertaking this work is that our neighbouring RDAs were also undertaking research and advocacy across their region. And this can all be collated together to provide a broader regional piece of work with many more voices and activators to help address this challenge. Already our collective work is being utilised, and I'll hand over to my colleagues Daniel and then Ryan to talk about the work that they're doing in that area.
Thank you. So, although childcare has been a persistent problem for a range of communities for a long time, as Claire said, it is something that's become ubiquitous in country areas, and it's a problem that needs to be solved soon. Fortunately, federal and state governments for the past 2 to 3 years have done some significant work to understand what the nature of the problems are, and we do have a bit of a moment where the stars are starting to align in terms of some significant work that has been done and is being done to try and address particularly the problems around access to 3-year-old preschool programs as a part of a broader suite of reforms in the early childcare and education space. The particular nuance that we've got from a regional perspective is that the most acute problem we have that needs to be solved is childcare specifically. Preschool programs have a really important role to play. Out-of-school care programs have a really important role to play in helping boost workforce participation by families, particularly mums. However, with the work that's being done at the moment and the policy directions that federal and state governments have been taking, there's a really significant chunk of the problem that is left to be solved, and that relates to childcare specifically. So, to help inform the solutions that need to be considered to solve these problems, and not just to sit back and cast stones, each of the RDAs, individually and collectively, have done some significant work in demand forecasting and putting together some business cases to really show the economic benefits that can be realised if we can solve these problems effectively. Essentially, it's a fairly simple set of considerations. If we don't have adequate services in region, we've got kids who are vulnerable, who can't be helped when they can't be picked up with problems at home. We've got families, and typically, unfairly, it's mum, who doesn't have the opportunity to go back to work in the way that she'd like to, and that exacerbates the problems that we've got around really heavily constrained workforces and really significant gaps in respect of the skilled workforce that we need to deliver the growth outcomes that are available to us. So the logic for investing to solve this problem is really straightforward. It's clear-cut, it's an easy thing to take on board. The problems vary significantly depending on where you are and the size of communities. In some instances, it's a lack of providers. In some instances, it's affordability. The policy prescription that particularly the federal government is going after at the moment seems to be mainly orientated around solving the affordability problem. That may be important, but before we can tackle the affordability problem, we need to have the centres open to service our local communities, irrespective of how much they cost to actually get kids into. The reason throughout the Yorka Mid-North, throughout the far north, throughout the regional rural parts of South Australia that we have really significant problems in accessing childcare is the fact that we've got thin markets with widely dispersed populations, which makes it really hard to establish services that can service local communities. Those smaller communities, those smaller numbers of kids enrolled in childcare programs pushes down the margins that can be generated by for-profit centres, which makes it really hard to put the capital up to build new facilities, to invest, to prove up demand, and actually run these services. Solving these small, sparse populations, the problems associated with servicing this, is going to take some governments to lean in, to de-risk these investments and really start to open up the services before we can get these services well utilised, paying for themselves, helping solve communities' needs for services, and enabling these communities to grow. The changes that we need to start to think about in the way that we go about solving these problems is, rather than going place by place, really fine-grained things where we know we've got challenges, families having to move back and forth between where they live, where they work to access services, we need to start to think about the catchment level planning activities that need to happen when it comes to thinking about minimum viable catchments, different models to suit different population sizes, and how we can start to think about developing solutions that work across regional communities rather than saying it's all too hard. And fortunately, through the work that's been done by Ryan, by Claire and by our other RDA colleagues, particularly the state government, but increasingly the federal government, are really starting to listen and starting to think about how they can come up with place-based nuanced solutions that picks up this logic and really starts to nail home and solve the problems. One of the key things that we need policymakers to understand is that we need different service models to service different communities. It's not going to be a 90 to 120 place centre that services every community. We need different solutions in different places to reflect the nuances in these communities. That means better access and better support for family daycare services in those really small communities. This is going to take legislative change to allow family daycare operators to work from the same venues so that they can provide support to one another. Expansions of rural care models. So these are typically services hosted within Department of Education school sites so that you can get up to 16 kids serviced, looked after within a service hosted by a department-led school. This is really important where we've got schools around the place that have spare capacity in their infrastructure, that have some of the organisational architecture in place, that can provide really cost-effective solutions and open up access to the small communities that characterise many of our regions. And in our larger towns, in our larger regional centres, we are going to need some support for underwriting the risk in establishing new standalone centres. This is something that particularly the federal government know needs to happen, but it's going to be a really hard pill to swallow when it comes to paying for it. The key thing to understand is that these models will pay for themselves if you can de-risk the capital investment up front. When it comes to paying for these things, it's something that's the returns justify the investment very, very quickly. Keenan made the comment that you should be sceptical of large numbers, and that's a very important point to make. So when we've gone about the work to do the economics, the business cases, to understand the returns from this investment, we can come up with some pretty solid arguments and pretty solid evidence to underpin the investments that need to be made to solve these problems. The productivity gains from having well-structured early education services lifts productivity for those kids over their lifetime. The returns in themselves are modest, to say the least, but they are cumulative and they grow over time. Having better educated kids who are better able to engage with education and training throughout their lifetime lifts their lifetime earning potential significantly. By having children in care creates much more space for families to go back to work, and to go back to work in a way that's meaningful and rewarding. We've got too many instances where we're losing doctors, allied health practitioners, teachers, people going back to Adelaide because they can't get care, they can't work. We need these services open so that we can get these people, particularly these mums, back to work so that they're doing something that's rewarding and meaningful. Based on the average utilisation for services, which sits at around about 22 hours per person, the actual number of households that can benefit from a licensed place goes up by a factor of about 1.7. So just having that capacity available has a really significant impact in terms of lifting that available workforce who can come through and deliver the projects and services that we need. The benefit cost ratio, and this is where Keenan's very astute comment becomes very apparent. Anything above 1 is worth investing in. Anything above 10 is probably bullshit. Very quickly, these projects pay for themselves. You're generating at least a 40% return, even with the most conservative assumptions. It's a no-brainer when it comes to paying for these services. Household income, again, with the most conservative set of assumptions, on average, weighted for participation and unemployment rates, you're still 17 grand in front, day dot, just by being able to be back at work. It's a problem that's worth solving. It's a problem that's going to take some time and investment to get right, but it's an easy problem to solve. With the work that we're doing collectively, we're working with the Office for Early Childhood Education and the Federal Department to really try and help put together a bit of a framework for how to start to solve these problems. Key change is required to actually realise these benefits and to solve these problems. Service planning at the catchment level. So understanding what populations look like across the region, where people live, where people access services, where people work, and coming up with solutions that are feasible insofar as you're not trying to create a Taj Mahal for every town, but accessible so that people can live and work in communities that we all love and care about. Making sure that we're using flexible service models so that not everyone needs a full standalone centre. Sometimes a service that's embedded within a preschool program or within a school is going to be the best fit. So making sure that department settings and policy settings have enough flexibility to make sure that we can get the right horses for courses is the right approach here. And finally, when it comes to funding, although there's some really encouraging signs coming down, particularly around the childcare subsidy payments for ongoing access of services, making sure these funding models that are coming forwards provide block funding, capital funding, or at the very least, finance to de-risk investments so that we can start to establish some bigger services in our larger regional towns. Otherwise, there's some particular examples, and I think Ryan's about to speak to some particular successes that they've had in actually getting some of this sense through to the decision makers in Canberra.
Thanks, Daniel. They said go last. You'll be right. Fill the gaps. Look, Claire and Daniel have done really well in setting the scene and covering the challenges facing us across regional South Australia. And I suppose I'll just talk a little bit about the Eyre Peninsula perspective. And just in terms of the strategic rationale, our board went through a planning process with all of our 11 councils and key stakeholders in the region. And one of the things that we were quite clear to identify early was there are significant projects that are going to be happening in our region, billions of dollars that are forecast in a pipeline. And as the other speakers have mentioned, they're just numbers. How do we capitalise, maximise the opportunity by ensuring that we have regional employment and ongoing regional employment, and what are the things that we need to put in place to support the workforce that's needed? And our board was quite clear in identifying, as a part of our key strategy moving forward, workforce attraction, retention, training and support was going to be critical to providing the workforce that's needed to deliver these projects, but more importantly, make sure that those workers stay in region and keep delivering a legacy moving forward. One of the actions that we identified was and we were hearing from the community that there was, long wait lists in communities in different centres for children that couldn't get onto a childcare or an early learning service. So what we felt is we needed to really understand that. So as part of the process, the board made some funds available to engage a consultant, and we also approached the state government to help us in funding a program to really get out into those communities, aggregate the demand so that we had some cold, hard data that we could present to decision makers both federally and in the state, as well as the private sector and non-for-profit sector, to encourage investment in our region. And we engaged CELA, a consultancy, to help undertake that process across our 11 councils. And the demand, and we were able to crystallise the demand that was there. Through that process, we identified 598 places of unmet demand currently in our communities, requiring 10 additional long day care centres at a cost of around $55 million to deliver the capital investment needed to build facilities or extend on facilities to meet that demand. And that demonstrated that by building those places, we would be able to get 1,000 people back into the workforce, and as Daniel said, and that's critical. And when we talk about the workforce and attracting and retaining the workforce needed to deliver on these projects, it's not just about childcare, it's about housing, healthcare, education and training. And when we've got a project or an initiative such as childcare, which essentially, if we can invest in the childcare and the capital that's needed to deliver those spaces, that's 1,000 people that are already living in our communities that can go straight back into the workforce. It really does bypass the need for that additional housing piece. So we can kind of see that by this investment in childcare facilities, we can get people that are already in these communities back into work. And one of the, I talked about $55 million worth of investment, capital investment was needed, but the business case that was undertaken demonstrated that by investing that $55 million up front, there was an annual increase in GDP by $55 million per annum in additional jobs and better employment and educational outcomes. So by making that investment, the business case was clear that by investing that money, the return on investment would be straightforward. So what we've been able to do is to aggregate that demand across the region, package that up into something that's going to be digestible and attractive, and we've been able to take that to Canberra to meet with the relevant ministers to say, hey, here's our region, here's the unmet demand, here's what it can be in terms of further employment and economic development. Here are the projects that are of state significance, of national significance, in all the projects that we've talked about in transitioning to a green economy, and these are the types of things that we need to be able to demonstrate to those decision makers. And we've had some really, really positive outcomes from making that trip to Canberra. We've been engaged with the federal government on some of the decisions and policies that are coming out now, and we're hoping to continue to influence those policies and attract investment in infrastructure across our region moving forward. So thanks very much for that.
Yes, thank you very much to Claire, Ryan and Daniel. I think you've certainly filled us in on a gaping hole that needs to be filled here, right across the state really, but certainly in these parts, and let's hope we can get some progress on that. Now, to close up today, I welcome the Honourable Rob Kerrin, the Executive Chair of Regional Development South Australia, and Kellyanne Saffin, CEO of RDSA Adelaide, to share with us some insights from the 2024 RDSA Regional Blueprint, which will be released officially today. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Right. I've got a little bit of a video on what's happened around the state that will be played in a second, but I'm going to be super quick for you all. Truly, you've been lovely. I have had the most lovely time this week, and it is a great opportunity for us to talk about, yes, big numbers, but numbers that we've been working pretty consistently. Can someone help me out and move that along? Consistently along the... Okay, the video's going. Wait a second.
Regional South Australia is on the move, and Regional Development Australia is at the heart of it. RDA is a national network that connects local, state and federal governments, bringing together businesses, communities and leaders to make real things happen. Our job? Making sure regions have what they need to thrive. In the past year alone, we've worked with over 3,300 businesses, helping them grow, innovate, and solve the challenges that matter most to their communities. We've hosted over 134 workshops, empowering more than 2,100 participants with skills that directly improve their business, workforce, and community. From workforce planning to financial management and leadership training, we give communities the tools they need to succeed. And we're shaping the future. Through our Regional Leadership Development Program, we've trained over 1,300 emerging leaders across 72 towns, delivering more than 14,000 hours of leadership development. RDA works with local, state and federal governments to direct investment where it's needed most, like key infrastructure projects identified in the RDSA infrastructure prioritisation. We're also driven to convert the 989 projects in the 2024 Regional Investment Pipeline to realise their $65.56 billion in potential capital expenditure. With government, businesses and communities working side by side, we're contributing to a stronger, more connected future for South Australia.
Thank you very much to Nathan, who's far better at that kind of things than I am. Thank you, Nathan. We've done some revision of the figures. Of course, I'm going to have the technology issues done. So these are the figures and what they look like. For those of you who will remember last year, we were sitting about 62 billion. They are big numbers. They have been revised upwards again in Eyre Peninsula, who have actually some completed projects. They are revised slightly down in Limestone Coast, who have removed some projects that will not happen. Particularly, I think it's important to talk about that because of policy decisions about offshore wind farms. I think that's just absolutely critical to talk about the fact that we're having those land use discussions right around the state. They are steady elsewhere, and this is the capital expenditure. So I want to be really clear that capital expenditure is not linked to ongoing jobs, but it shows a really important trend. And Rob and I were talking about this in terms of reshaping where it is. We have had a record year in relation to GRP in South Australia, the highest that has ever been put in place. And right now it doesn't feel like it because the season's dwindling around us, and Carolyn's quite right. 25.3% of our economy in regional South Australia is linked to agricultural sector. But I just want to take a couple of minutes and say that that is the best it's ever been, and that is against trend. And Keenan's right, our growth against GRP is very strong, and we need to celebrate and embrace that as we go forward. I wanted to show you something, though, that I think is so critically important, and this is the last slide, because I will get you home on time. Could you guys move it for me? Thanks, guys. This year in the blueprint, which will be emailed to you tomorrow morning, we've actually provided a capital expenditure as projected against each of the ANZIC codes to give you a bit more detail about where we are. So we do accumulate this across forward projections. We have looked at catalyst programs. We do move projects out. Ben has allowed me to use this example. We haven't included Gifford Hill in the 5 years projection, which is a big project in Murray Bridge, $7 billion of expenditure. If we don't think it's actually ready to go, we're not putting it in there, and we will continue to do that. Just want to talk about the fact that this is slightly only incremental change. The biggest challenge is the capacity for us to deliver on the workforce and otherwise, and that's the change that we think hopefully we had an opportunity to grapple with today. And I want to leave you with that as a final note as I go through, is just to say that this is unique. And while it's not always perfect, at 989 projects that we're tracking, we actually go back to Peter Crew and PIRSA and tell them when we're involved in those projects. It's a huge undertaking. It's an incredible piece of work to which we should be really proud of, that South Australia can do this and has the flexibility to deliver, and we need to figure out the ways in which we can even use it even more. So I just want to say thank you for that. I think I've almost made up the time, Mike, which is good, and Rob's going to finish us off today, so thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Kellyanne, and that's Kellyanne's last time at the microphone with the RDAs. So, and she's been there thousands of times. So I'll come back and thank her at the end. Just wanted to thank those who've brought this together, and Mike for your efforts today. And Mike, we really appreciate being asked. You appreciate being asked, but we really appreciate the fact that you've been willing to travel up here and take a day off 7. Mike's been around for a long time. I've known him for 30 years. Always liked him, but I had to for the first 15 years. But I like him even more now. He didn't bother me at all. To the staff of RDA Far North, Claire and your group, thank you very much for doing all the local sort of work on this, and Rachel, who's been down the other end working for RDA Adelaide. She's only just started a few weeks ago, so she was thrown in the deep end, but done a great job. To all our regional local government partners, we really appreciate your support and your support of functions like this as well. That's terrific. To the 57 RDA employees who work tirelessly across the state, thank you for your contributions. The 76 local board members of RDAs who give their time for the betterment of their communities. They're drawn from business, local government and community. And their ongoing commitment is terrific. Look, to all our speakers and panel members, a massive thank you, particularly with the travel element of coming here. We really do appreciate that. Your contributions have given us enormous food for thought on what is a really group of complex issues. To all who have attended, thank you very much, and hope that you all found the agenda very interesting. You got a lot out of it, and if everyone can please drive very safely home. To Kellyanne, first up, thanks for your work on the summit. That's much appreciated, and yet another success for yourself. All best. Kellyanne has basically dedicated the last 12 years to the RDA structure and has been simply outstanding. Firstly with the RDA in the York and Mid-North, but then she shifted to Adelaide RDA and has taken, will help the board take that to another level, which is terrific. She's got an infectious energy, a massive capacity for work and a very creative mind, which leaves some of us standing behind sometimes. And importantly, she really does care. She cares about her colleagues, she cares about her people, and she cares about regional SA. And we're going to be really sad to lose Kellyanne, but we're much happier that we've had her for as long as we've actually had. We're all better for the experience of working with you, Kellyanne, and the fun we've had as a group with many shared goals. Kellyanne's leaving a real legacy. While she may be leaving, her work on the infrastructure priority, the blueprint, the investment pipeline, etc., will ensure that we continue to benefit from your hard work for many years. So thank you and all the best for that. And Claire's bringing a little gesture from the back of the room. Do you want to say anything? Or no? Okay. So come up here, Kellyanne. And can I just call Jan Turnbull, who's the chair of RDA Adelaide, just to make another announcement. Thanks, Jan.
I know that I thanked Kellyanne last night, but I'm going to do it again. I'm sorry. But certainly on behalf of my board, I want to thank her for 2 years of incredible professionalism. She can talk anyone under the desk and around the building, and that's her absolute key strength. So well done, Kellyanne, thank you. And I have also great pleasure in announcing that Leonie Boothby has been appointed as our new CE. Leonie is up the back. Oh, there she is. She's waving. Fantastic. So Leonie is no stranger to the network and will start full-time with RDA Adelaide in January. Congratulations, Leonie. Looking forward very much to working with you. So thank you, everybody, for attending. We've had a ball. Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that wraps up a very successful conference. And just looking at the clock, it's bang on 3:30. So, as Rob said, drive carefully. Thanks for coming. See you next year. And let's hope everything goes in the right direction. It certainly is at the moment. Thanks for having me. Goodbye.